really having the backup and having the rationale for the comps that you're selecting, why they're comparables, and then the adjustments that you're making on them is, I think, real high on the list of priorities in terms of protecting yourself from these.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
Welcome, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out in the podcast chair. Got a great guest coming up. First, want to remind you that we're sponsored by a couple great companies. Of course, WorkingRE Magazine. I've got it right here on my desk because I read it faithfully. WorkingRE.com is where you find out more. WorkingRE.com and Alamode. Alamode, of course, is the software that I use every day. I've got it up on my screen right now. I was just doing a revision request earlier. Alamode makes it easy. Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. I want to welcome back to the program a friend of the program, been on many times, not just a friend of the program, but a friend of me, Mr. Isaac Peck. At least I hope you consider me a friend, but I definitely consider you a friend. Isaac, welcome back.
Absolutely, Dustin. You and I go back more than a decade, I think.
It is a long time, and always a pleasure to be with you on screen. Even more of a pleasure to see you in person, which I was able to do a few weeks back. But thank you for coming. Just for the listeners who are not familiar with you, Isaac. Isaac is the publisher of the WorkingRE Magazine and the president of OREP. He is the leading provider, of E&O insurance for more than 10,000 real estate appraisers across the United States. Incredible. He received his master's degree in accounting. I always find that funny, at the San Diego State University. Accounting, yet you are a writer by trade, my friend.
That's right.
Thanks
for having me.
It's always good having you. And honestly, if I had you on every single time you wrote a great article in WorkingRE, we would probably have to call this the Isaac Peck Show with co-host Dustin Harris. Because you just do a fabulous job. But this particular article, for those of you who are on YouTube, I'm just going to show it to the camera here. Awesome job on this, my friend. It is called Inside Access to Fannie Mae's Complaint Process. Isaac, complaint processes are not things that appraisers want to hear about, but they are a fact of life. Tell us a little bit about why this particular article.
Yeah, I try to be the bearer of good news. So it's always soul searching when I have to report something like this. So the Fannie Mae actually came out with a newsletter late last year where they report they're filing almost 1,100 state board complaints against appraisers in any given year.
Wow.
So for the year 2022, they say we filed 1,086 state board complaints, and they call it tips. So
yeah, of course. Oh, no, it's not complaints; it's tips, right?
1,086 tips to your state board, and that's just Fannie Mae, and we know that Freddie Mac is also also filing complaints against appraisers. So if we were to add them both together, we might be looking at 2,000 state board complaints filed against appraisers every year. And Fannie goes through, what causes them to file the complaints against appraisers. A lot of us have been watching this issue very closely. I mean, appraisers have been receiving hundreds and thousands of board complaints.
Right.
And we were all under the impression that they were doing this in somewhat of an automated fashion in terms of an automated filing of complaints to state boards everywhere. And Fannie Mae says, no, we're actually manually reviewing this. And they reveal that before each complaint is filed against an appraiser, they've actually forced a buyback of the loan on the lender or the AMC because of the appraisal deficiency.
Is that 100% of the time, Isaac? In other words, does the complaint, actually two questions. They're going to sound similar, but there's two separate questions here. Does the complaint from Fannie Mae always come because of a buyback? And do they always file a complaint when there's a buyback?
That's what they say. I don't know if that's always 100% accurate.
Okay.
We've seen plenty of cases where an appraiser uses a word like a gentrification or uses another, any of the no words. And we've seen complaints filed on those appraisals almost immediately or within very short order. And so I think that there are cases where Fannie is filing a complaint where they haven't forced a buyback or they're not done with the buyback process. And the other thing that I want to clarify is we're talking about buybacks in the context of appraisal deficiencies.
Okay. Let's just be fair. Isn't that usually where Fannie goes? I mean, they have very few things to go back and point fingers at the lender for. And it seems to be my experience, and I've done a lot of coaching with appraisers who have had complaints filed against them. It seems like inevitably that's where they go, is to point the finger at the appraiser.
I don't know that I think if you were to look at all the reasons that Fannie is forcing a buyback of a loan on a lender, appraisal is just going to be a part of that.
Okay. All right.
Because borrower income verification and all kinds of other underwriting criteria that go into a mortgage loan, right? Did they fluff his income? Did they report his debt correctly, or her debt? Right, the borrower, all of the borrower qualification process. Those could be reasons why a loan buyback is forced back on the lender.
And maybe we should start here, just not just making an assumption that everybody listening to this program even understands the terminology buyback. Right. Let's talk a little bit about that. What does that mean when we talk about a Fannie Mae buyback?
So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are purchasing over 60% of all residential mortgages in the United States. So large banks, U.S. Bank, Chase Bank, most of them are not holding that mortgage paper on their own books.
Right, we would call that in-house, and most of these go out of house, meaning they get resold to Fannie or Freddie.
Yeah, so they're making loans and they're giving people mortgages, and then they're selling those loans to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac.
Mm-hmm.
And Fannie Mae is running their own quality processes on those loans, on the buyer's income, the borrower profile, and the appraisal. And then they're going back to the lenders and saying, in some cases, in the cases that we're talking about here, they're saying, we don't like these appraisals. We think this is a defective appraisal, and we want you to buy this loan back, or pay us a nice sum of money, and we'll keep it. But we think this is a defective appraisal. You must buy this loan back. And then the lender has an opportunity to respond to that and defend the appraisal. And sometimes they're going to include the appraiser in that conversation, and sometimes they're not. But that's what we're talking about when we say buyback.
Yeah, and would you agree with me? I think you alluded to this earlier, that when you hear of a buyback, so you're Dustin Harris hanging out. You did an appraisal in Wyoming, 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago, whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden you hear from the lender and say, hey, we've got a potential buyback here, and here's some questions that we have for you on the original appraisal. Two questions, Isaac. Would you, as an appraiser, ignore that? And number two, should the appraiser plan on a state board investigation to follow something like that?
Yes. Well, I think appraisers should take it very seriously, because now we know it kind of at the conclusion of that, if the buyback ends up getting pushed through by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, that you can count on a state board complaint getting filed against you at the conclusion of that process. But there's also the potential for a claim coming out of these buybacks.
So Sorry, go ahead.
So in a smaller percent of these cases, when the lender is forced to buy back the loan, they feel particularly wronged by the appraisal, and they'll go to the appraiser and say, "Look, we think that as a result of having to buy this loan back or pay Fannie, their alternative fee, you owe us $20 or $30 or $40,000 because Fannie found your appraisal to be defective. That hurt us in some way, so we're now bringing a claim against you. Please write us a check."
Mm-hmm. So when you get that, it's not the same as a state board investigation, though that may be coming. Not only, Isaac, are you the publisher of WorkingRE Magazine, but you're the president of OREP. From an E&O standpoint, if I received word from the lender, from the AMC, from whomever, that there's a potential buyback here, what would you recommend your insurees do at that point?
Reach out to experienced appraisers in your area and seek their advice and feedback on your response as you're defending your work in front of Fannie Mae.
Wouldn't you agree that whatever you do to defend that buyback is also probably going to come into play when and if that state board investigation comes in on that particular report?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably not good to say one thing to your lender and another thing to the state board when they ask the same question a few weeks or months later.
Right. And this is, this early in the process, right? If one of your clients brings you in on that conversation and says, "Look, Fannie Mae is trying to force us to buy back this loan because of your appraisal," this is not a situation where you need to run out and hire a legal counsel or an attorney, because they're not really going to help you convince Fannie Mae of the high quality nature of your work. So we think a better approach would be to seek out a USPAP expert or another really experienced appraiser in your area, and ask them to spend an hour or two reviewing your response, reviewing your work, so you're offering back kind of the most persuasive, strongest argument you can make in terms of convincing the folks at Fannie to accept the appraisal and leave you alone.
Yeah, for sure. I've spoken, Isaac, to a lot of different appraisers who have had this process happen to them, unfortunately, by Fannie Mae. There's a lot of questions that this particular article tackles, and I really want to dive into the meat of that when we get back from the break. But first, I want to pause and remind you that we are sponsored by a couple of great companies, one of them being, if you're on YouTube, you're seeing what I'm seeing, WorkingRE Magazine. Isaac, of course, is the publisher of WorkingRE, and always on the tip of the spear, if you will, on what's going on in the appraisal industry. Folks, if you're not getting this magazine in your inbox, go to their website, workingre.com, and sign up. Make sure that you are on their mailing list. It's fabulous. I have to say, Isaac, I don't read very many physical magazines, but every single time this comes out, I read it cover to cover, and every appraiser should. Workingre.com, again, workingre.com. Of course, we're sponsored by a la mode. I mentioned I was just doing a revision request from one of my clients just this morning. It was very easy to do with a la mode. Folks, they make it so easy. Some people ask me, well, what's the difference? It costs more for a la mode. Why would I pay more when something else can do the same thing? And my answer is always the same: because your thing can't do the same thing. It's all about efficiency. It's all about tools. It's all about working smarter, not harder. Check them out by going to alamode.com, or you can pick up the phone and call them. Ask them those questions. Why should I go with you? Pick up the phone, call them at 800-ALA-MODE. All right, folks, welcome back to the program. We're talking with Isaac Peck. He, of course, is the publisher of WorkingRE Magazine. Great article, Isaac. Inside access to Fannie Mae's complaint process. Bravo, way to go, and thank you for being on the program. Welcome back.
Thank you, Dustin. You're too kind.
Well, it's a really good article. It really dives into a lot of questions that I have had from clients as I've coached individuals who have had these complaints. Now, that's not my main gig, right? But because of the all-star team, because of the dream team, because of the private coaching that I do, a lot of people reach out to me and say, "Hey, Dustin, I got a problem here. What would you suggest I do here?" And there's a lot of questions that come with these. Let's first talk a little bit about what types of appraisals these are. You talked a little bit about them being buybacks. Does that mean it's a bad appraisal if it's a buyback?
It just means that Fannie Mae thinks it is.
I love it. That was an awesome answer. Yeah, for sure. Right. In other words, this is what they're going to point the finger for. Hey, this loan's going bad. We've got to point the finger somewhere. And like I said earlier, it seems like, and maybe it's just because it's my experience with my clients, that it seems like the appraiser is one of the first individuals to get to that finger pointed at. These are happening sometimes years after the appraisal is done, correct?
Yes.
Is there a statute of limitation? Some appraisers say, well, I only have to keep my work file for 5 years. Is it possible to see a buyback 6, 7 years down the road, or not quite that long?
That I'm not sure. I think the majority of these are happening within a couple of years' time. Mm-hmm. So I haven't seen any that are, outside of 5 years. Generally, we would recommend keeping your records over 5 years, as long as you're doing good work. Lots of plaintiffs, and especially when we talk about lawsuits, they try to find every reason why a statute of limitations doesn't apply, etc.
Right. Well, the other thing to think about, folks, as you're listening to this is, the importance of a great work file, right? I mean, let's just say it's a year later. How many appraisals have you done in the last year? And I know some of you go, I remember every house and every appraisal I ever did. Well, do you? And all the details as to why you made this adjustment and that adjustment, it just kind of punctuates why it's so important to keep all of those records. Isaac, some of these complaints seem unfounded. Some appraisers will come to me and say, I'm looking at this. Where did this even come from? And some have asked, and I think you addressed this in the article. In fact, you addressed it slightly as we first started the program today. You said these are not automated. This is not coming from a computer. At least they're claiming they're not, right? These are manually reviewed.
That's what they say. Yeah. And I think, to your point, appraisers have a lot of legitimate grievances in terms of, Fannie Mae is judging your work as an appraiser, and how well do they really have geographic competency in your area? We work with appraisers all over the country. And in some cases, they're appraising in rural Alabama, and Fannie Mae's coming back and saying, we don't think that you did that right. You should have pulled comps from here instead of there. Right. And the question that appraisers ask is kind of does Fannie Mae really have the expertise to be quarterbacking your appraisal in your area? They do have licensed appraisers on staff. Are those appraisers intimately familiar with your market and your area and the neighborhoods in your market? No, not in a lot of cases. And so I think that criticism from appraisers it has some merit to it.
Yeah, I talked to an appraiser recently who had this situation, a buyback, and eventually turned into a state board investigation. And I'm paraphrasing, but one of the things he said to me on a coaching call, he said, Dustin, if they were going to pick an appraisal to complain about, holy smokes, did they pick a good one? I mean, there is nothing wrong with this report, and yet they've come back and said, why did you use these 4 comps when you could have used these 4 comps? And his answer was because those 4 comps aren't comps.
Right.
It just doesn't seem like you said, they have the competency sometimes to complain, yet this is where they're going. So let's talk a little bit. I don't want to dive in too much to the list of common deficiencies, because I want people to actually go to the article, right, at WorkingRE. But what general advice would you give us, Isaac, as far as, let's do some preventative maintenance? How do we keep these from happening? What can we do as appraisers to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's?
Well, the support for your adjustments is something that Fannie has been harping on for easily the last 8 to 10 years. It's a common bullet point in all the complaints that they file. Description of the subject, description of the comps, and then selection of comparables is another bullet that we see very often in Fannie's complaints. So really having the backup and having the rationale for the comps that you're selecting, why they're comparables, and then the adjustments that you're making on them is, I think, real high on the list of priorities in terms of protecting yourself from these.
You mean just doing your job as an appraiser? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
How, final question on this particular article, Isaac, what are the states doing about these? In other words, if there truly are, the number you use, potentially 2,000 complaints a year, that's a lot of complaints that are going into 50 states, right?
Oh, yeah.
55 provinces, right? Are state boards always taking these on, or a lot of these just going away? And like you said, maybe appraisers never even knew they got turned in.
It varies by state. And so some states have accept them all and investigate them all. Some states require an individual to sign the actual complaint. And so I think in the early days of Fannie Mae's complaint process, they were just shooting off emails, like, emailing the Board of California and emailing the Board of Ohio, for example, whereas those states have specific complaint forms that an individual must sign in order to submit a complaint. And so in the early days of Fannie running this process and just shooting off emails with complaints, a lot of those were just getting tossed in the trash, we think, because Fannie wasn't following that state specific process, wasn't respecting the process, if you will. And so since that time, we've seen Fannie kind of adapt to the different state processes. So they are having an individual Fannie Mae employee sign complaints, for example, in Texas. And so Texas will forward on a copy of that to the appraiser. And in a lot of cases, we see the state boards redacting the name of the individual who signed the report or signed the complaint, who's an employee of Fannie Mae. And Fannie has the short answer is Fannie has been adjusting its approach to comply with the different state requirements, and they are having their employees personally sign the complaints against appraisers. But some states are still not very warm to the idea of receiving dozens of state board complaints against appraisers. And so it's a case-by-case basis.
The article is Inside Access to Fannie Mae's Complaint Process. It can be found, of course, in, let me change cameras, make sure you can see what I'm showing everybody, right? WorkingRE Magazine, Isaac Peck, the publisher of WorkingRE. Thank you, my friend, for being on again. We'll have you again very soon.
Thanks for having me, Dustin. It's always a pleasure.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.